Hello, comrades. Thanks for joining us. This is a very exciting day today, launch of a new series. We want to look at a few aspects around what kind of party, how to build a communist party specifically. After the defeat of the Corbyn movement, there have been lots of organizations being set up, a lot of head scratching going on the left. What kind of party, who should be involved, what should it look like? We clearly do need a party so that the working class can fight for what is needed, the overthrow of capitalism. Considering the rightward march of the US at the moment and many countries across Europe and now including Germany, and the climate catastrophe, this has become from an important thing to do to an absolute and urgent necessity. But what kind of party is required to fight for what we believe is the need for a radically different society? There are many, far too many organizations on the left currently out there fighting pretty much for the same kind of organization, including the Corbyn party that might or might not launch or might not have Corbyn attached to it in some form or another. These groups are all united in fighting for what they think is a broad left, where we speak just about the 80% we all agree on, more money for the NHS, etc. It's good, but we'll just keep stum about the 20% where we probably disagree. The crucial bit, in our opinion, probably, how do we bloody get there? And what are we going to do when we get there? The speakers here tonight are united in their belief that there are no shortcuts and that we cannot trick the working class into making revolution, but that we actually need a genuine communist party. And those three here tonight, they are all involved in a fusion process. Why Marx is not part of this fusion process, we should say, because we're not a membership organization, but we're very supportive of this process and are hoping that we can help it become successful and out in the open by discussing some of the issues and possible problems we might encounter along the way and some of the questions that need discussing. So they're doing their fusion process. We're doing an education and discussion series in a spirit of solidarity, we could say it like this. So we have three speakers here tonight. We're going to start with Nick Wrack from Talking About Socialism, followed by Katrina Rylance from the Prometheus editorial board, who's speaking in a personal capacity, and then Jack Conrad last from the CPGB Weekly Worker. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Tina. Thank you all for coming. Welcome. I'm very pleased to be the first speaker in this discussion, which, as Tina has said, is kicking off a whole series of discussions under the Why Marx banner, in addition to, I'm sure, other meetings that will be taking place, hosted either independently, separately by the different organizations involved or collectively, as well as the fusion talks themselves, which are currently meeting every fortnight. So from my point of view and the position of talking about socialism from a Marxist point of view, we think that the beginnings of these talks are very important, without exaggerating things, and we're very excited about them. We think that if we are able to achieve even a small coming together of communists into something bigger than the component parts of these talks, then we will have achieved something very important and will be a significant step, we expect and we hope. So there's so much to say in this discussion. I'm not going to be able to even begin to touch on everything. It's going to be headlines, and hopefully people will raise questions that will trigger further discussion. But the title of this discussion, if I've got it correct, is Why We Are Fighting for a Mass Communist Party and How. And I was thinking about how to introduce it, or how to begin my introduction. And I decided on saying the answer to me seems so self-evident as to be incorporated in the question itself. First of all, I'm assuming that most, if not all, of the people attending this webinar are communists of one sort or another. When I use the term communist, and I know this isn't shared across the speakers today, when I use the term communist, I actually use it in the same way as I would describe myself, or would have described myself in the past, as a socialist, somebody who wants to see an end to capitalism and wants to see a new form of society coming into existence in which the private ownership of the means of production has been abolished, in which we have collective ownership, democratically planned for need and not for profit. And for me, communism is summed up in the famous aphorism of Marx, from each according to his or her ability, to each according to their needs. Now, why do we need a mass communist party? Well, first of all, we need a communist party because we're communists and we want to see a new society. And if we want to get there, we have to be organized. And if we want to be organized, what is it that we're organized around? We're organized around a program to achieve communism. Other people on the left don't agree with us that either communism is necessary, or perhaps they don't agree that communism can be achieved. And so they set their sights lower, either because they don't think what they really want can be achieved, or because they actually disagree with the whole concept. So they set their sights at something different, and that's their prerogative. They will organize in a different type of party. It won't be a communist party. Jeremy Corbyn's program, and the program, therefore, that is being used around which the people in collective and the various organizations that are involved in that project come about, it is not communist. And I would say it's not socialist in the sense that I use the word as synonymous with communist. It's social democratic. And in a sense, it's not even social democratic as we might have understood in the relatively recent past, where people had the idea that somehow a new society would grow out of this society, albeit gradually. Most people who are on the left don't really have that vision at all. They've resolved to content themselves with trying to achieve some form of better management of the present system. And that's really what social democracy has become. It's a program that is limited entirely to trying to wrest some form of concession or some kind of reform from the present system. Now, communists, of course, want reforms. We want concessions, but that is not the limit of our aim. Our aim is to get rid of this system entirely. The way that I see it, capitalism, the profit system, is the cause of all of the ills that we see in society, whether that's malnutrition, because people don't have access to food, lack of access to water. Nearly half of the world's population doesn't have access to clean water. Inequality, poverty, starvation, austerity measures in the more advanced world. They are all caused by the profit system. The inequality which is widening, the climate crisis that is developing, the threat of nuclear weapons being used in a world war, all of these come down to the very nature of capitalism, which is based on the exploitation of the working class, the vast majority of the world's population, exploited in the interests of creating a profit for a tiny class that owns the means of production. That is the land, the waters, the mineral in the land, the factories, the science and the technology, the transport, all of which in this system is not used to make sure that people have everything that they need, but is used to make sure that this tiny class gets richer and richer. Now, I believe that the ideas of communism, if presented in a simple way and explained, can become the common sense of the working class as a whole. Most workers understand that when they go to work, they are making a profit for the boss. They go home with their packet and struggle to pay their bills. They see the boss drive out of the factory gates in a Rolls Royce or a Mercedes or whatever. But the boss above them really doesn't go to work at all. The owners, they reap the dividends, they reap the profit, and they go out and they do what they want, whether that's playing golf or go on their luxury yacht cruises. And most workers know that. But because of the failure of the socialist movement, we haven't posed an alternative in a confident, bold, and understandable, intelligible way. And over the last decades, the ideas of real communism have retreated. It's important to say at the beginning of this discussion, and I'm sure I'm not saying anything that the other two speakers will disagree with, I'm not talking about communism as existed in the Soviet Union. I'm not talking about the communism of the Chinese Communist Party. I'm talking about real communism, as I explained in my opening remarks, the genuine ideas of communism as developed by Marx and Engels. And those are the ideas that we really need to bring up to date and apply in the modern world and show a way forward. In the absence of a communist alternative being presented confidently, boldly, positively, then it's not a surprise that workers who see deprivation, degradation, no way forward for themselves or their children or their grandchildren are seduced by the rotten right-wing arguments of organizations like Reform and further to the right. We need to have a societal systemic alternative to present. So why a communist party? Because it's the only solution for humanity. It's the only solution that can prevent climate catastrophe. It's the only solution by eradicating competition and the competition for resources, access to water, minerals, and so on that can prevent wars. A collaborative system in which everybody does what they can and receives what they need. So communism, that's what we aim for, and we need a party to achieve it. It won't be that the working class wakes up one morning ad idem, all of the same view, that things need to change unless we have organized. So we have to take the ideas to the working class. We have to take the ideas of communism wherever the workers are. So the role of a communist party will be to go to the workers, go to the working class with our ideas and persuade them that these ideas are necessary for their emancipation from the exploitation of capitalism. Now, these discussions are starting out with very small numbers. There are bigger organizations on the left. There are probably a lot more people who consider themselves to be communists who aren't in any organization. But we think that it's necessary to start somewhere where we are at the moment. We need a mass communist party. So why mass? We have communist groups, revolutionary socialist groups, and they actually seemingly reject the idea of a mass organization. They think that if it becomes mass, it will inevitably become reformist. It will inevitably capitulate to capitalism, to the idea that all you can get is reforms. I don't agree with that. I consider myself to be a communist, and I have done since I was a teenager. but there's nothing special about me. If we can become communists, then every worker, every member of the working class can become a communist. The reason why it being a mass communist party is so important is because of the way we see the transformation of society taking place. It can't be achieved by an individual or a clique or a tiny group. It's got to be the conscious act of the working class. That's really important. It will be, if we are successful, the most democratic event in the history of humanity. And therefore, if we are to persuade and win the working class to the ideas of communism, we need to build a mass communist party in order to do that. We need millions upon millions upon millions of active persuaders, people who will argue and will be active in the working class. So that's the way that I see us trying to move towards that. It's a long, long way away. But as I say, we have to start somewhere. If the leaders of the existing revolutionary socialist or communist organizations were serious, in my opinion, they would already have initiated discussions between the different groups, saying, how can we collaborate? How can we work together? How can we fuse into one single organization so we don't duplicate our work, so we don't unnecessarily tread on each other's toes, competing to recruit the same people? They won't do that, unfortunately. However, in those organizations, there are hundreds, probably thousands upon thousands, without exaggerating, of people who could be won to the idea of a united communist party, not immediately, but by showing that it's possible for communists from different backgrounds, from different traditions, who have disagreements, to come together. And that's what we're embarking. We won't agree on everything. And that's why a communist party, a real communist party, has to be democratic. It has to have the room for people to express their views. In fact, it would be incumbent, obligatory for people to express their views. And there'd be a debate on the basis that everybody in that party is agreed on the need for that revolutionary transformation of society, the abolition of capitalism, the emancipation of the working class, the expropriation of the expropriators. And therefore, any disagreements within that are in that context. I do not agree with the broad party project, the idea that communists should basically put their shoulder to the wheel of social democracy, really a version of liberalism. We do not want to manage capitalism. We want to abolish it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Over to you, Kat, who's speaking as in personal capacity from the Prometheus editorial group.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Tina, for organising it, and yeah, appreciate the introduction Nick gave as well. I obviously didn't know exactly what other people were going to say, but luckily we've not covered the same ground, so that's good. I'm going to focus on the second part of the title. So the title is sort of why are we arguing for a communist party, a mass communist party, and how do we get there? So I'm going to focus on the questions. Obviously, not got all of the answers, but the big questions and the different maybe ideas or strategies that are contained in how we actually get there, and the questions that pose us right now. I think some of them we probably, you know, all of us on the panel and in the meeting, we'll probably all have pretty clear answers on some aspects of it, what it does or doesn't look like. But then there's going to be some of the, I guess, more practical questions in the immediate of how we push forward with this process. Well, actually, there might be different strategies, different ideas of how we can push that forward. So I'm going to try and cover as much of that as I can within the 15 minutes, but anything that I don't cover, hopefully people can continue to pick up these questions. Obviously, I think fundamentally, the thing that needs to be, that we need to win over, is we need to win over this conception of the party. But, you know, for myself, I guess I am very concerned with actually what are the practical tasks in front of us of how we can push this forward, because I do think that there is a lot of potential for it right now. Just, I suppose a lot of it's anecdotal, but just what I see myself in the movement around me, the conversations that I have with people, it looks a lot more politically advanced in that sense than what I experienced maybe like 10 years ago, in terms of when you're talking about the party, when you're talking about the basis upon which the party should be organised. There seems to be a lot more ground for making these arguments. So I suppose, I am concerned about how we can take this forward and what kind of work we might need to be doing to push that forward. So to start off, when we talk about the formation of a mass communist party, or what might be required to do that, is usually talked about as being a top-down process. So I think it's very important to clarify exactly what we mean by that. What do we mean when we talk about it as a top-down process? Obviously, I think for all of us, we're trying to fight for a world of liberation and freedom from domination. Obviously, it's not the kind of thing that we like to hear, top-down process. But I think we have to be very clear about what we mean by that. So it is not a minority having the say and directing the process and getting to make all of the decisions. What we mean fundamentally when we talk about it in that way is that politics determine organisation. So we begin from that process of political clarification, that process of political discussion, in order to outline, first of all, our fundamental strategy. How, you know, when we say that we want to see the social transformation of society as a whole, what is the strategy by which that is achieved? So we would usually think about that and express that as being the working class seizure of power. People might have different ideas about exactly what that looks like or what that means, but that's what we're talking about, expressing the fundamental strategy upon which we see society being transformed. It's also laying out the principles that we think are necessary in order to forward that strategy, and the work that we might need to do to carry that forward. So that's what we're talking about. Expressing those politics then determines how we organise, the basis upon which we organise. To make that clearer, I suppose, is easiest to contrast it with the opposite approach, which is that organisation itself is primary, and the politics emerge from that. So that's probably most clearly expressed, for example, in articles like the Joe Todd one that he kindly submitted to Prometheus, in the politics expressed by Assemble, related to the kind of Just Stop Oil umbrella. And the argument there is, what you need to do is get people together into assemblies, into whatever kind of conference format, and see what emerges from that. Pull the movement together and see what emerges from it, and then we will organise on that basis. So it's not the fundamental strategy of social transformation that determines how we organise and the basis upon which we organise, but it's the other way around. The organisation is primary, and from there we move forward with determine the political basis upon which we organise. Now, obviously, you know, I'm not without sympathy for the impulses that kind of lie behind that, the importance of kind of valuing the expression and voice of others within the movement. But I think there are some fundamental problems with that approach. It's something that, you know, we discussed a bit locally with kind of Communist Future, having those discussions with Assemble around these questions. But I think there are some fundamental problems with it. And I think, you know, a lot of those people who are sympathetic towards that perspective, actually through discussion can come to kind of understand why we begin the other way around. So I think it's dependent, this idea that, you know, we organise, that the organisation determines our politics, and that it's this bottom-up process. This is dependent on the idea either that that politics that entails a strategy of fundamental social transformation, that will just emerge naturally. If you can get those people together, that will emerge naturally from that. We don't need to go in and present our ideas and push for our ideas and try to impose them onto others. If you bring people together, it'll emerge through that process. So that's the work in front of us, to bring these people together, to organise people. So that lays the task of those who are in favour of revolutionary social transformation. It's to get people together, to organise people, and not to place primacy on putting forward and winning the arguments upon the political basis it should be organised. So it's either dependent on that, or it's dependent on something perhaps slightly more of a rocky basis, which I think is that if you can get people organised and moving, they're not necessarily going to form on the basis of, they're not going to form an organisation that explicitly is in favour of social transformation, but the act of them doing it will push forward the fight for social transformation. So people getting moving and people organising will barrel into the type of social transformation that we want. What that means is that the underlying strategy of those advocating that type of approach actually is not the strategy that ends up getting expressed in these organisations. So you have this kind of layer, this maybe insulated circle of people who develop strategy, but that isn't expressed in the party itself. The party is just there to get people organised and get people moving. And that looks quite different, I suppose, to the conception of a mass communist party that Nick has outlined there, a party which itself forms and expresses strategy, that has that opportunity for the advanced sections of the working class to use their knowledge and use their experience to produce the highest that we possibly can, that is itself the space in which we express and fight for that strategy of social transformation. Something that is the conscious expression of that social transformation, rather than something that through movement, the working class or the wider movement kind of barrels into that strategy. So as I say, in practice, what this means is that the actual strategy of social transformation, it remains determined by these inaccessible circles that are then enacted onto the wider, broad party, rather than cracked open and determined by and expressed by the party itself. So it forces us to ask, what is the unit, what is the institution or the grouping that actually determines strategy? Is it the party? Is it done in the party and fought out in the open within the party? Or do we have this kind of broader party formation, momentum, assemble, whatever it might be? And then we have another layer of people who have a wider strategy of social transformation, but it's not cracked out openly to others. And I think, you know, a lot of the activists within Assemble, actually they're coming at it because they do want the process to be open, and they do want it to engage you know, as widely as possible. And when you put those arguments to them, that is convincing, because do we really want to be in a position where a self-selecting group of you know, strategizers and organizers just sort of enact the positions onto this inert movement that isn't really even conscious of what it's doing? I don't think anybody who, you know, at the base of those groups is won over by that. I don't think that's really what they want to create. And it's on us to win over our conception of the party and our conception of what the basis upon which the party is organised. It's on us to kind of win that argument. So obviously it tends towards that, but it also tends towards a very kind of chaotic reformism that you know, obviously I've talked about those at the bottom of those groups who are in it for the right reasons, but it also benefits the manoeuvring of reformist operators at the top of these organisations, who can use these arguments to close off the possibility of open expression of revolutionary politics. So they might argue that it's limiting us, it's limiting our audience. It doesn't fully reflect the politics of the wider movement as a whole. We're imposing our revolutionary ideas on others. So at any turn, we're prevented from openly expressing the ideas of the actual revolutionary social transformation of society, the actual strategy that we're fighting for, because of this idea that we begin with organisation, getting people together, and that is the highest expression here, and that is primary. So what we begin with then is this idea that it is top down in the sense that it is beginning from the political basis. So that means for those of us in terms of moving towards unity or building a party, developing the party, that means that it is a process that involves substantial discussion and clarification amongst ourselves. So if we're asking how we get there, that's one of the first things that we have to acknowledge and be clear on. And that's important because it is often something that is resisted by the pressure to get doing things or to be aware of the wider left layers out there who aren't organised, but we need to kind of get out there and get in touch with them. And we absolutely do need to be doing that, but on what basis? And what this kind of conception of how we move towards this position, what it's doing is saying actually that process of political discussion and clarification amongst ourselves, amongst the left as a whole, that is fundamentally important to us, and that we do need to put time aside for that. So that tells us part of what this process will need and what it might look like. But obviously there's other questions for us to contend with. I've put quite a lot together, so please just cut me off, Tina, if I'm going over. So from my experience, what I've kind of laid out there, I think a lot of people have become more convinced on these arguments and more convinced on the arguments around the need for a mass communist party. But obviously there are still differences about how we see that coming about. And I think one of the, if we look at the situation that we're in right now, how do we get from having a fractured left with very isolated sects that don't have any meaningful interaction with each other? We're saying that we need to have this process of political clarification, programmatic discussion, whatever it might be. But we're in a position where people don't even talk to each other. They don't even interact with each other. Whenever we do interact with each other in unions or in broader parties, it's kind of with another hat on, and we don't really get that opportunity to have that open, substantial political discussion that is necessary. So how do we get from that position to the position where in the basis of maybe we have the foundations of a communist party? I think one of the biggest areas that there isn't agreement on with people who are coming towards these ideas is, does this involve regroupment, going through the left, the arguments that the Weekly Worker puts forward, or is it something that we can just say, look at this mess of the sects and the left as it is? We can't really win that. It's a mess, and we can't really sort that out. We need to, take those ideas of democratic organising, take those ideas of acceptance of the programme, take those ideas and try and build something better and win people over on that basis. And obviously, I would strongly make the argument that the Weekly Worker would, that this needs to be a process of regroupment, and this needs to be a process in which we orientate towards the rest of the left, and we go through the left in building this. But I do appreciate the criticisms that those who have opposing ideas have on it. I mean, I think in some ways it involves both. We do need to build a strong core of those who have clear pro-party arguments, a force that can exist substantially in the movement, be able to practically on the ground be making these arguments, winning people over. We need to have that force in order to push this forward. But that doesn't then allow us, I think, to sidestep the question of how we relate to the rest of the left. From my perspective, I look out at the rest of the left and I see us essentially as being parts of an unformed party that might go through a process of splitting, coming together in some parts, but that's the basis upon which we will form something meaningful. if we imagine ourselves to simply be the ones who can do it better this time or properly, and we can emerge above the rest of them, I think that's, it's, obviously I think that there are fundamentally, good arguments that will help us do that in terms of democratic organising of the party, etc. But that's also what every other sect thinks. Every other sect out there thinks, well, we can just be the ones to push above it. And that doesn't really wash in practice within the wider movement, because people will end up getting filtered one way or the other into any of these sects as they develop. And it doesn't really enable us to overcome the situation we're in. Continually, good communists are getting recruited over and over again into these sects. We're not getting away from that position by separating ourselves out from that process. So I think that's important, because that tells us a lot about our work in the here and now. If we think that it is important to engage with the rest of the left and to orientate to the rest of the left, then that tells us about the kind of work we might need to do and how we might need to do it. So it tells us that we need to have means of opening up dialogue. We're in a situation where we're not really relating. These sects aren't really relating to each other in any substantial way. So we need to think about how that dialogue can be opened up. Obviously, there's so many barriers standing in the way of that, but it's about thinking about what's in front of us, what's possible, and what means we might be able to do that. And secondly, it involves polemicizing. It involves polemicizing against each other. We need to, take seriously the idea that if we are all of the left as a whole, if we are this kind of unformed basis of a party, then actually what every single other element of the left is doing is important to us. So when we polemicize towards them, it's not to get a little advantage for our sect over them. It's because we take seriously the fact that what one group is saying, well, that impacts on and influences the whole. And it's important to us that that is transformed, or that is contested, or that we have some kind of argument and discussion around it. And I don't think that always comes across when we make these polemical arguments to others on the left. In practice, when I talk about it with people in the wider movement, people are so quick to say, oh, you're just kind of saying this because you want to get this for your group, or, I've been called parasitic because you just want to go along and attack the other groups and maybe pull recruits off them. Obviously, that's not the position that I'm coming from. I'm coming from the position that I actually do take seriously other people on the left. And I do think to kind of win this situation that we're in, we need to direct ourselves towards each other. We need to make criticisms if we think that the principles or the strategy that's being expressed, if that's taking us away from the political basis that we need to push forward. But I think we do need to take seriously.
2 minutes.
2 minutes, thank you. So I think we do need to take seriously the question of how we can do that effectively. And I suppose that's something that matters to me quite a lot, and something that I think is an area in which we could develop a lot, and we could push ourselves forward a lot. And that is about thinking how we polemicize in the most effective way. And I know that is something that I've expressed previously in discussions with comrades, but I think it is something, just through my own experience, but also the experience of others, something that I think is an area that we can develop and push on a lot. So what that involves then, as I started off, saying that it's a top-down process, but it's also a bottom-up process. We need to have that basis where we talk to each other, where we're involved in the movement with each other, where we work together and have that open dialogue with each other. Because when we advance written polemics or whatever it might be, what allows them to take purchase with others? People on a human level have to be able to open themselves up to that criticism. And if you trust that somebody is genuinely invested in the same sort of thing that you're talking about, you trust them through the work that you do together, you're much more likely to respond to that. The leaderships of the sects are materially invested in the maintenance of these differences and separations. It allows them to have their own fiefdoms. But those at the bottom of the organisations, those are the people who will push against that, who will change it, who will question it. And it's about how we relate to those people, how we can support and win them in the struggles that they're making within their organisations. And I think that's part of the work we need to do. Obviously, I've written quite a bit more about other aspects of that, you know, the small scale regroupment that we're talking about now, interventions in broader fronts, but hopefully that's stuff that people can pick up in the discussion about the kind of practical stuff we want to do to move towards that. But I just wanted to lay out, I suppose, the big questions around the work that we can do to push this project forward. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Conrad. This is only the first meeting of hopefully many meetings. So you can come back into this meeting, of course, again, and we're going to have other meetings discussing these issues. Thank you, Kat. Over to you, Jack.
Yeah, thanks. And I think it's going to be a very useful series of meetings, a long series of meetings. And I hope that our discussion in Forging Communist Unity will also be productive. I'm sure they will be. Just starting off with the sort of why, you know, just looking around the world, just listening to Donald Trump talking about Gaza, just listening to what's going on in Ukraine, just listening to what's going on in terms of, you know, fires and flooding and global warming. That's why we need a Communist Party. That's why we need a mass Communist Party. The situation, I think, you know, that we need on the one side to have a degree of patience. You know, there we are, we're small groups, we're looking at the left, and the temptation is always there, I think, looking at the situation. There must be a shortcut. And if I knew a shortcut, quite frankly, I would have taken it. If someone can tell me what the shortcut is, I will take it. But I think that we have to have a degree of patience. And this is the sort of paradox in terms of where we live, or, you know, the conditions of where we live. That on the one side, we're saying a mass Communist Party. And yet there's this urgency in terms of climate, war, the threat of nuclear war, you know, genocide, ethnic cleansing, you name it. So, you know, the fact of the matter is, I don't think there are any easy roads. I think it's going to be, relatively speaking, a long road. I hope it's going to be as short as possible, but it's also got to be as long as necessary. So I think, as I said, you know, that we're very aware in terms of forging communist unity about the forces that we're talking about. We're talking about handfuls, and it would be ridiculous to pretend anything else. But the key question, I think, is the message it can send out. And if we are successful, as I think we will be, this will resonate with the rest of the left. And although, you know, I mean, Nick, you were talking about communism in that sense being a minority view. Well, clearly it is on one level. But on the other hand, I mean, you and me and everyone else on this call, you know that if you talk to so-called ordinary people and you say, well, production on the basis of need, consumption on the basis of need as well, putting in your due effort, you know, not expecting, you know, some fabulous return. Most people actually turn around and say that's a good idea. And the problem is, what they then say is, well, how are you going to get it? And then they also say, less now than they used to. What about Russia? And I do think that Russia, the Soviet Union, Nick, you sort of referred to it quite rightly, because we've got to show that was an abomination that has cost our species, our class, a huge amount. It was both a huge leap forward, and yet it also threw us back, and it's tainted us. And that's been a huge problem that isn't going to go away, because if we start being successful, you know perfectly well that the bourgeoisie, the paid persuaders, would be unleashed upon us. So we need answers. And I think this is the importance of theory. This is the importance of sophisticated ideas. So we need both easy ideas. We need both agitational ideas, but those ideas have to be backed up with a real accounting of what went before and why it went wrong, and why this time what we'll be attempting will be different. And I think, you know, that that's why program is important. Program not just sort of plucked out of thin air, but program developed precisely through a process of criticism and ruthless self-criticism of our past efforts. So it's no good turning up to people and say, well, look at me, I'm an honest guy. You know, look at me, would I do anything dreadful? Sort of shucks. No, of course not. But we need precisely explanations of why things went wrong, why good people did do terrible things. Okay. So in terms of our other problem, and this is the whole question of easy routes. I did notice on the chat, one of the comrades said that what we need is we need to study the transitional method or the transitional program. I'm not quite sure which. And I have, believe me, I have. Of course, I've read it, but I've also studied it, and I've also criticized it. And I think that the problem precisely on the left lies there, that this program written, I would guess in haste by Trotsky when his forces were minuscule on a global scale, when he could see World War II coming, of where he could envisage the possibility of a socialist revolution, but where's the party? Where are the forces that can deliver it? And I think he fell back onto spontaneity. And I think this is the problem with so many groups, is they imagine that actually what happened in 1917 wasn't the Bolshevik Party re-winning its majority. I'll say that again, re-winning its majority in the working class, a majority that was proved in 1905, 1906, 1907, was also proved in 1912 in the elections to the terribly undemocratic Tsarist Duma, and was proved in the course of 1917. The transitionalists, our SWP comrades, our SPEW comrades, our resisting anti-capitalist resistance, I can carry on down the list. They all imagine that the Bolsheviks emerged as something like them, from exile in February 1917, and went from being a tiny isolated group to being the majority, and were sort of catapulted forward by the revolutionary situation. And I also noticed precisely in that context, one of the comrades commenting that you can't have a revolutionary working class in a non-revolutionary situation. I think that's just disproved by history. If we look at the inspiration for Russian social democracy, I don't think there's any doubt about it. It was German social democracy, which was described as a state within a state. German social democracy was the biggest party in the Reichstag. If we look, as I've already illustrated, at the Bolsheviks, clearly they were a mass party, not only in 1905, not only in 1917, but in non-revolutionary circumstances. So I personally don't think that we want to, in that sense, justify our disorganization, our amateurishness, our hopelessness, with the idea that every little group will suddenly become the majority in a revolutionary situation. It's impossible. What will happen in a revolutionary situation is, one, we'll all grow a bit bigger, I'm sure, but we'll all remain sects, we'll all remain fragmented. And then we'll be in a situation that the revolutionary situation is resolved, but not in a positive way, but in a negative fashion. So that's my fear. That's why I think actually polemics, argument is necessary. If it was just a question of spontaneity, if it was just a question of backing strikes or backing the comrades, you know, around just say no to oil or other such very worthy campaigns, we would have had socialism, you know, decades ago. But look at us now. The demand, you know, the need for socialism is certainly there. It's increasing, you know, with every day that passes. But our seeming ability to organize anything effective that could have any hope of delivering it is further away than ever. Okay, just a couple of other points. The party that we must aspire to needs to be mass. That's absolutely right. And to be mass, it's got to, you know, have one, some sort of situation of where comrades can argue out their differences, genuine, legitimate differences. Sometimes they'll argue out their differences fiercely. But if you don't have that, what you set up is precisely what we've been plagued with over the last 50 and more years. And that is, if you have a disagreement, either the leadership kick you out, or if you have a disagreement, people view it as, well, I have a disagreement, I'm walking out. But with this idea that you're going to set up the true sect, that when the revolutionary situation comes, it won't be the other 50, I should put it, 56 other varieties that will grow. It will be your sect alone, uniquely, that will grow into mass proportion. So we need democracy. We need space to argue. We need space to argue through serious ideas in a serious way. If we don't have that, then I think we'll get nowhere. I mean, and just to illustrate that, if we look back at these mass parties that I've referred to, you know, argument, polemic, not just between them and other groups, but internally was the norm. You know, if you look at Lenin's collected works, yeah, of course, there's lots of polemics directed at the Mensheviks and the socialist revolutionaries. You know, I haven't done a sort of statistical analysis, but there's plenty that are directed internally. And what went for Lenin also went for other Russian leaders. What went for Russian leaders also went for German leaders. So this is the sort of historic tradition, at least I would refer to. Of course, we've got to be critical. I've already said that. We all know what happened to German social democracy in 1914. We all know what the Russian Revolution produced. So we need both criticism, but we also need to be learning from the best achievements, the highest achievements of the past. And talking about learning, I mean, I agree with Kat. Here we are, we're small numbers. We want to go out, we want to convince the majority of the working class. We're saying that program is key, you know, ideas are key. But we also need to recognize that in struggle, you know, the masses will teach us. They'll teach us a huge amount in terms of creativity. They will become leaders themselves. And, you know, I've already mentioned the Soviets. It wasn't the Bolsheviks that thought up Soviets. My understanding is that initially the Bolsheviks, Lenin not least, would have been horrified by the idea of Soviets, you know, the spontaneity. Nonetheless, in the end, what we have is the Bolsheviks, you know, coming to power precisely on the basis of the slogan, all power to the Soviets. Again, something that almost certainly wasn't concocted in the Central Committee, certainly something that arose spontaneously in the worker mass who'd become increasingly Bolshevik. Either way, the point is there that what we're talking about, of course, has an element of top down. It can't have anything else. But it also involves, in that sense, a dynamic that unleashes creativity at every level of the working class, both in terms of generating ideas, generating artistic expression, generating worker leaders. So this is the sort of party that I think that we have in common, that we're aspiring to. Is there anything else? I don't think so. I think that would do. I think that would do me, and I'd be very interested in terms of what comrades on the call have to say in response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, comrades. So I suggest we're gonna I'm gonna ask a couple of questions of the panelists, and perhaps you want to, while answering, could get back at each other as well if you have something that you wanted to raise that you heard from one of the other speakers as well. And comrades in the audience, is, by the way, there's been over 100 already, so it's we're 93 at the moment, but we had close to over 100. So that's very good, very interesting. I think a very interesting discussion we're having. If you want to speak, please click raise hand, and I can bring you in. You can ask a question. So, I mean, the crucial question perhaps is, and Jack mentioned that, raised that at the end a little bit, is how do we deal with differences? How do we avoid when Nick and Jack or Kat and somebody else have a difference, or even other people? How do we avoid the splitting illness? How do we build a party where different groups can, and I suspect when you guys get together, you'll do so as factions in a way, aren't you? You represent various trends and you come together with a group of people each, and you'll probably discuss a fight over some issues. How do we avoid that we split, where how can we look at the program in a way that allows different people to get involved, disagree about various prospects? Yes, of course, there's having arguments, etc. But also, where do you see faction rights? Where do you see the question of, democratic centralism as defined in a democratic way? We've had a session last week where it was defined as quite negatively. Nick, can I ask you on that? How do you think the party, in the fusion process, how does it deal with differences of opinion?
Well, I don't know how it's going to go in the fusion discussion, so that's to be seen. But I'm sure there will be differences. I know that there will be differences because I'll be raising some. But I'm hoping that the discussions will be amongst serious comrades. That means that people will fight their corner. And I hope that where there are differences, where there are disagreements, we see it on the basis that we're fighting. We're fighting because we think those ideas are correct. It may be that we're persuaded. It may be that we're not. Ultimately, I want to see a situation where we can fuse into one organization. And it may be that some people, maybe myself, are in a minority in that. But that's an inevitability on occasion. So sharp discussions, sharp differences. I think that I suppose that the real thing is to see what is it we're trying to achieve. How important is it for humanity? And if we see it in that context, and we understand that in order to achieve what we want, we need a mass party, and it's going to be democratic, then we're going to have to swallow being defeated in votes on occasion, and that's it. What I think my own experiences, and I'm sure the experiences of others are, what I want to avoid is where it's a monolith without discussion. You know, I'm sort of long in the tooth and I'm pretty pachydermous, thick-skinned, so I can take it. But other people, they don't want to be told all the time. They want to question, they want to fight back, they want to challenge and say, why? What about this? I have to say, looking at some of the comments in the chat, it says that some of the differences are real differences. I don't buy that. I don't buy it. I think the differences that exist between organizations like the SWP or the RCP pale into insignificance against the task that both organizations should be prioritizing, and that is building a mass force and creating the structures and the democracy and the culture whereby the comrades in those organizations challenge one another. And if decisions are taken that turn out to be wrong, then they can be corrected, but they can only be corrected if you've got the ability to challenge and raise your arguments. I mean, Jack's just talked about Lenin's, you know, incorrect assessment of the Soviets. I mean, there are other things that you could point back. I don't really particularly like looking back all the time at the Bolsheviks because, you know, a lot of the stuff is not particularly relevant for the present period. But the question of learning from mistakes, you know, when do you boycott participation in elections, things like that, you know, you only learn from experience. It's not, it shouldn't be a question, well, you got that wrong, we're leaving. We got that wrong, how do we make the party better next time? I'm very encouraged by this. I mean, anybody that's followed my relationship with the Weekly Worker would think, why on earth are you going through this? It's because I think it's important. And you know, I may disagree on this, that, or the other, but I respect communists who are serious and want to achieve something. So I've probably spoken for longer than I ought to on that.
Thanks, Nick. There's actually a comment just made in the chat in a Q&A, and maybe I can ask you that, Kat. Is there a space for consensus decision making in a communist party, which is of course to the point of, you know, how do we deal with differences? Consensus, in my understanding, has always been used to shut minorities up, usually, because somebody somewhere is saying what the consensus is going to have to be, you know, and putting forward your opinion is usually then the one that ends up in the consensus. And if you disagree, you're being viewed as the troublemaker. What's your view on sort of consensus and decision making?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm not in favour of it. I understand the impulse behind it. You know, sometimes to be honest, I don't think I've ever been in the majority in any organisation I've ever been in. So it's definitely frustrating when you feel like you're never having any sort of, you know, you're never kind of winning any discussions or having any kind of active role in that. And I suppose in some ways it appears like a gentler way of making decisions because everybody sort of chips in. But I guess in my own experience of, you know, being involved in aspects of the movement that use that kind of consensus decision making in like the student movement and stuff, I agree with what you say, Tina, that those who, you know, as I kind of described in my opening, those who will use this kind of, you know, this approach of, well, we have to kind of ensure that everybody's view is kind of conglomerated into this. Everybody in the movement needs to be, we need to see what everybody thinks. And actually people aren't really into these revolutionary ideas. And actually, you know, those who are kind of, you know, genuinely invested in like participatory forms of democracy, I'm not questioning those people, but how that then gets used by particular people in the movement to push revolutionary politics. As you say, you become seen as difficult. There's no real mechanism for you to actually organise as a minority. So if you come together and you discuss and you sort of consensus decision to, you know, the whatever the baseline of the people there, well, if you're in a minority and you want to put forward something, you know, your own politics within that, there's not really a clear mechanism for you to do that. You end up expressing something that becomes difficult to this body. You become like a block on any decisions, any organising, and the result in practice actually is that, you know, that kind of tyranny of structurelessness begins to emerge, and those who friends, you know, have like affinity groups or whatever, come to dominate these spaces. People feel that they can't really speak up. They don't even know the clear mechanisms that they can come to influence the sort of collective decision that gets made. It is difficult doing majority decision making. It isn't particularly, you know, always the easiest thing, and it isn't particularly always something that you end up winning. But it gives us the clearest and most transparent and most straightforward out in the open means of actually clarifying our positions, for minorities actually to have the means to try and win over the majority, and particularly, you know, within the wider movement as a whole, those of us who have revolutionary politics, to actually be able to argue for those politics within the movement, and to actually have the mechanisms of accountability and transparency. So yeah, I appreciate why people come towards it, but I think in practice it takes us away from that transparency and accountability and that political clarification that we need.
Thank you. So Jack, last week we had a speaker in the session. The main speaker was very opposed to democratic centralism, because for him that is the old sex. That's the WRP. They claimed they used democratic centralism. It was probably in your view, I suppose it's a bureaucratic centralism. What can you outline how you think a communist organization, a mass communist party, would operate under democratic centralism?
Well, I'll just do that very briefly. I mean, we've got a long way to go, and I'm sure we'll come back to this question. But yeah, I mean, I think democratic centralism as practiced on the left at the moment, I can understand why the comrades in the Socialist Party don't use the word, but they still do it though, because I haven't read in, for example, I don't think in my lifetime, I have to read the Socialist, by the way, every week. It's part of my duties. But I don't think I've ever read, other than when it came to assisted dying, any expression of difference in that paper, you know, by comrades in the Socialist Party. Wow. Well, if I read, I don't know, Pravda, you know, in 1912, I suspect I would be reading lots of differences. Sorry for looking back, but you get the point. Even when I was a member of the official Communist Party, it was the norm. So in that sense, you know, we've gone back so that we get the left press is the equivalent of an advertising sheet. So we all know when it comes to advertising, they're not going to tell you, actually, this product is crap, or there's a warning sign here that, you know, so it impoverishes our culture. So bureaucratic centralism is deadly. Democratic centralism, on the other hand, my understanding was, this is from my comrade Ben Lewis, is the idea was developed in Germany to control the parliamentary fraction. You do what the party tells you, not what your constituents or what you fancy, what your conscience leads you to. Either way, I just wanted to come very briefly, and just, I've used the example before, but I mean, occasionally I read New Scientist, occasionally I read Nature. You know, communists should educate themselves. And what, you know, I find a situation where scientists disagree with each other, fight out their ideas. And Nick's right. practice ultimately decides. You can have all sorts of theories, and scientists are very good at setting up tests, experiments to show who's right or who's wrong. Now, we can't do that in the class struggle, an experiment, but the class struggle teaches. And hopefully any party that's worth its salt will learn from the class. So it's not a question of us being the great brains, coming along with these ideas, here you are, and expecting people to be, grateful. We need to learn. And I'll just finish with this, again, in terms of argument, I know you've used this argument before. I just want to give it a particular twist, Nick. You've said, well, even football fans argue. Well, bloody hell, I used to live next to Arsenal football ground, and different teams would argue with each other. But if you go to the right pub, say the Arsenal pub, what do the fans do? They're all arguing with each other. What about the manager? What about this player? It's called being human. And so the idea that the left, only the leaders, in their closed central committees, argue with each other, do they? Or is it the guru who comes out with all truth? No, human beings, because we all have different experiences. We all have, something to bring. It's natural for us to argue. So the idea of a party press, the idea of a mass communist party without argument is a contradiction in terms. To me, it's like saying you can have science without argument, science without investigation, science without differences. How can science advance if you cannot criticize? So yeah, we need democratic centralism to control the leaders, not so the leaders can control the rank and file. That should be our approach. But we also need democracy, so that critical ideas that are new, that can correct us, teach us, that can flourish and persuade us all. And we will be persuaded. I hope, once things start to move, then we can be persuaded, because then we can test out our ideas, not in theory, but in practice.
Thanks. Yeah, that also answers, I think, one of the questions in the Q&A by Comrade Critchley about Corbyn. Part of the reason he was defeated is that he had no media on his side, and we do need our own media. Absolutely, this is part of it. We need papers. We need I don't know how many hundred newspapers the Social Democratic Party in Germany at one time, but they did. Factory papers, local papers, regional papers. They were very, very keen on having their own media. It's quite incredible that Corbyn didn't even try to set up a newspaper or a YouTube channel, anything like that. Okay, we're bringing some comrades from the floor now. Jane, would you like to come in?
Yeah,
Hi.
thank you. Hello, Tina. Just first of all, thank you, because it's very interesting and important discussion, I think. But I just wanted to go back to, Nick mentioned that perhaps we shouldn't always be going back to the Russian Revolution as our starting point. I think I would like to turn to what's happening now in France. As you know, I'm very interested in Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and the things that we've been discussing, the difference between a bloc and a party, is being worked out in Parliament this week, particularly when, once again, Bayrou, the Prime Minister, has cut across all democratic debate and brought out Article 49.3 again to stop the vote, the Parti Socialiste has, of course, let the bloc down and created another crisis. And it could seem, and certainly the British press is always reporting, that the left in France is lurching from crisis to crisis. But what isn't understood here, I think, is that just as Jack was saying, that you need to be able to do experiments Scientists need to do experiments, or it's not science. You need to be in a critical situation. And Mélenchon rightly believes, I think, that that the proper sort of scientific experimental situation, the situation to which you have to react and organize your reactions, is actually in the day-to-day government of the country. And I think he gets this largely from a body of theory that in France is quite well known, which is that of Leclos and Mouffe, which is the idea that the left wing is in fact always an area in which there's a struggle for hegemony, and we've been discussing that again and again. But the only way to be able to create a bloc, or to create some kind of movement, mass party, is in fact to react to what is right in front of you. It's the moment. We talk about the revolutionary moment. That's broken down into structured pieces in the parliament in France, and that everything which comes up there in the Chambre des Députés is the moment at which all of the parts of the left wing have their discussion, their battle for hegemony, and create their real, honest, true policy. So that you're always in an experimental and a critical framework day after day, and I think it's a different theory from one that is held in Britain at all. It's a different attitude to the party. It overrides the problems, the silo problem that we have, not because the human nature in France is any different, or that leaders want to be the one who are leading the whole party, not that at all, but because they accept that every moment is a moment of strife amongst them, but it doesn't mean the total collapse of the movement, and they're ready for it. So I do think that what worries me is that we don't look to the experiments that are going on in our own day and the successful organization of the left, where it's being successful, and rather look back to a time quite long ago, rather than what's actually going on now. Sorry. Anyway. It's late in the day for me to be thinking coherently, Tina. I'm sorry.
I think we understand what you're trying to say. Thank you, Conrad. Kat, Nick, and Jack, if you want to come in this discussion, just raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll take you at the end to sum up. Anne. You're muted.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Okay, so I was just saying thanks. It's been interesting, and actually I can hear differences from you immediately. Although this is just the beginning, I can more in terms of approach. In particular, Kat, I think partly I didn't understand everything you were saying. I think you were like speaking maybe like in philosophical terms, and it's just me, I haven't exactly got it. So I'll be interested to see how those arguments develop. I just wanted to make a few points. Firstly, in terms of looking back and whether we should look back or should look forward. Well, my view is that we have to see ourselves in historical terms as part of a movement that goes way back before the Russian Revolution, way back, to the beginnings of class society, and certainly to the beginnings of when human beings put down their thoughts and beliefs in writing, to see the struggle of human beings against class society, so we can place ourselves back in the struggles in Britain, before the Charters, the Levellers and Diggers. And in Ireland, you know, we can place ourselves back in the struggles that have been written about early Celtic society and the way the forms of society. So I think it's extremely important, though, to place the Russian Revolution in context of this was the first time when the state was overthrown in a struggle for communism. And it's not a case where everything that we take from that is, you know, the lesson, this is what you should do, Lenin said this, and therefore it's true. But nevertheless, I think that it's an important testing ground for our ideas, and we should understand what worked and what didn't work, and how, and then look from that, of course, into the Second International and understand where the communist parties came from. Anyway, so I think that it's very important to see our struggle in those terms and to see us as going in that period between capitalism, communism, and we're in that transitionary period, which is one where there'll be many attempts made and they'll be thrown back, but we'll fight again. So because there's been some comments in the chat about, you know, this is bound to be a failure, all small groups or whatever, I think it's very important to take a more optimistic view, and rather than stay in the situation where we are now, where there's an impasse, where we're stuck, that we should take the opportunity. And so therefore I commend comrades on doing this. So here in Ireland, like, we have a very active movement at the moment, and I think the movement around Palestine is extremely symbolic and important for the international movement, and it shows, you know, it reflects every problem that we have today with capitalism in terms of world domination by the United States, the situation, you know, that the United States is in, and the situation for our movement. So in Ireland, not surprisingly, the Palestinian movement is strong because there's a very clear identification between the anti-colonial movement here, the anti-colonial legacy, and the situation in Palestine. And we have many demonstrations. Weekly in Cork, we have demonstrations of between 500 and 1,000 people. So we've actually almost really become comrades. We are in many respects comrades in arms, but we don't have a party. And so therefore we keep going on protest. And like, we all bloody know that the government isn't going to take any notice of us because we're not in a position to be able to really do anything. And that is the frustration that people voice all the time. People who've been involved in struggle, in my experience, very rarely want to go back to their normal lives. They like being in struggle. They enjoy the politics. People who've been, you know, going home and watching their soap operas, living their lives in their homes, within their family centres, particularly women, I would say, who've got involved in this movement and that who I've come to know over the last 15 months, they've changed so much. They're interested in every aspect of politics. Like, in many ways, they don't need to be taught by us as communists about how bad the world is. But what they need is a perspective, a program, an understanding of how to fundamentally change this. And of course, that's organization, and it's also program. I have a particular problem here in Ireland because nobody will let me join their organization because I'm, I suppose, known as a troublemaker. I don't know exactly what they say about me behind my back, but I know I have caused controversy within the People for Profit organization, within the SWP, because of what I've written about Richard Boyd Barrett, their leader, in the pages of the Weekly Worker. And in particular, I've condemned him for calling for support for Sinn Féin. I'm going to finish now, Tina. Anyway, so this has led to them refusing to allow me to join their party. Notwithstanding that, I work with all their comrades in Cork. They all want me to join their party, but they've been told, no, she's not allowed in. So it's not about me, it's about themselves. Like, they really are shooting themselves in the foot by not allowing in somebody who plays a leading role in the movement. But of course, it's all because of this kind of control thing, the wish to control debate, and fundamentally the wish to refuse to allow differences of opinion to be had out in a strong and open manner, and to be controversial. the right to be controversial. I think that's what I would defend. Thank you, Tina. Sorry for going on so long.
Very well put. Thank you, Anne. Steve Freeman, I want to finish this part at 8:15 so that the three comrades have 5 minutes each to speak. So please keep it a bit short, comrades. Thank you.
I'll do my best, team. I thank the comrades for their presentations. I'm going to watch this process with interest. And obviously, small groups can get together. I mean, I'm going to echo something that I saw Lee Rock saying in the chat. But obviously, small groups can get together and can talk to each other, can debate, can cooperate, and be more effective by doing that than they would be alone. You know, that is a good thing in itself as far as it goes. But in a sense, you could be in a bubble just talking to yourselves while the rest of the world carried on because of mass parties. So I really want to focus on this word mass. Because a mass party cannot be built except in a relationship with the masses. You know, and whether that be in the trade union movement where masses are, or in the mass social democratic movement, however we see that at the present moment in time. Because if you may speak of a mass communist party, which everybody, I mean, it's either the trivial point that everybody would like to be in a party with millions of people. Why do you want to be in a party with 10 people if you can only be in a party with 1 million, 2 million, thousands of people? Of course, we were in favor of millions of people joining us as opposed to just having a few people. But the fact is, there are limits, there are circumstances, there are conditions when no matter how you try, you can't create a mass party. And I don't believe a mass communist party is possible in 2025, 2026. So that's not I'm not setting that against this process, by the way. But I do think, on the other hand, that a mass social democratic party is possible. And I mean by that, with 10,000 people in it, or maybe 100,000 people in it. And the reason why I say that now in 2025 is because the Corbyn movement was a mass movement. It had maybe 500,000 members. It had 11 million people voting for it. So that did something that did happen. Of course, we know it was defeated. We know it's fragmented and everybody's going all over the place. A mass social democratic party is possible because of the depth of the crisis and the nature of the crisis, and the fact that the Labour Party itself is a neoliberal party. So I think if we're going to be discussing not only programme and how we talk to each other and how much democracy we have, how we're going to relate to the actual movement that's there, that exists as it is now, then we have to have some perspective on that. And I'll finish, Tina, with this, but we did have a go at communist rapprochement in the past. I mean, I've here, if you can see that, maybe you can't see it, maybe it's not visible. It's showing itself up. Here's a magazine called Republican Communist. I open up issue number 2 and see who's writing in it. Jack Conrad was writing on the British-Irish debate, as was Alan Armstrong, Mary Ward, Nick Clark, John knows and Tina knows all these people, Brian Higgins, somebody called Dave Craig, Barry Biddle, another of John's favourites, etc. Writing in this magazine when we were trying to do a communist rapprochement process in the year 2000. And just to say, I'll end on this point, that when we actually debated this through, and it didn't succeed, it didn't fail, but after about 5 issues, in the winter of 2001, winter of 2001, it had 5 bullet points. And I'll tell you what they were, because it said the Republican Communist Network is what it was called, is a network of groups and individuals united under the slogan of 1, republicanism, 2, revolutionary democracy and democratic culture, 3, workers' power, 4, international socialist revolution, 5, world communism. Now, those 5 points, to me, that we put together in the year 2000, I would want to know whether this grouping goes with those points or does something better than them, or is something less than them, because I feel that's what we did then is still a marker point to achieve and go beyond it, because it didn't work, by the way, it failed, sort of fell apart. But anyway, we had to go at this before. Well, we must learn from the past. Finish that thing.
Thanks, Steve. Andy, please.
Hello, comrades. Thanks for putting on what was a very useful debate. Couple of points. One is in relation to a comment from Nick, I believe, which was around, he wasn't overly keen on looking at history or whatever was said by certain individuals 100 years ago. But I do think it's important that we do look at those things, because I think it was Jack who said we need to account for what happened with the Soviet Union for all sorts of different reasons, not only in terms of if you like, cleansing our banner, but also in understanding what went wrong to prevent those things from happening again. And quite clearly, although there were objective reasons we could point to in terms of the isolation, the backwardness of the Russian economy, etc., there were decisions made that, in hindsight, were wrong decisions. I'd like to ask the panel about the question of programme. There's been comments in the chat around the transitional programme and the transitional method, and again, Jack referenced these, but I do think this issue is fundamental, because while a minimum maximum programme certainly did not prevent the leadership of the German party from collapsing into social chauvinism in 1914, what we've seen, I think, since the transitional method or transitional program was published, has been a recipe for opportunism, and also quite cynical attitude, not only to the working class, but also to their own membership by groups which formally adhere to that as their method. And I do think fundamentally a minimum maximum program, like I say, it's not some kind of silver bullet or magic bullet that prevents you collapsing into opportunism or reformism or whatever, but a minimum maximum program which quite clearly links reforms through to the maximum program, i.e. socialism and the transition to full communism, is a method that allows the membership and allows the working class to hold the leadership to account and to challenge any changes or failures to adhere to that program. And it also allows for those debates that need to take place to have a structured process to them, because you're talking about particular changes or policies around the program itself. There was a comment I wanted to make in relation to something Steve Freeman said, but it slipped my mind. I'm conscious of the time, so I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thanks, Andy.
Oh, sorry, just very briefly. I would welcome comments from the three panelists around how they envisage the program to be. Do they feel that the transitional method is something that would be useful as part of this process, or not? Yeah.
Thanks, Andy. I think the next speaker certainly does. Marion. You're muted, Marion.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting discussion. First of all, we need a revolutionary party based on historical and historical materialism. That has to be stated as fact. Secondly, I think since I became a revolutionary, and I'm in the tradition of the American Socialist Workers' Party of James P. Cannon and others, that's the tradition I adhere to. And one of the things I've learned, I have had a university education, but I'm not necessarily as theoretical as a lot of other people. But one thing I understood is, how are we going to bring about revolutionary change in this country and around the world? How do we change the consciousness of the masses to become a revolutionary consciousness, where they then develop the tools to overthrow capitalism and imperialism? And I think that's some of the things we need to be asking ourselves. What kind of vehicle do we need to bring about that transition? Well, I argue you need a mass revolutionary party conscious of what's necessary to be done to bring about change. Now, some people argue we're not in a revolutionary period. Well, I still think we're in the epoch of wars and revolutions. There's been many more wars, but there's also been some revolutionary changes across the globe. And you have to look at the profound crisis of capitalism and imperialism. And you're seeing more and more wars. I mean, what Trump just wanted to take over Canada, Greenland, the Gaza Strip. This is a kind of period we're in. How do we change it? Well, we need to actually orient. Where I would agree with Steve Freeman, you need to have an orientation to the mass organisation, to the working class. But you also have to develop a programme and change the understanding that a lot of people have. I also agree with Anne McShane. When working class people and working class women go into struggle, their horizons change. We saw it most clearly during the miners' strike with the development of the miners' wife action groups and things like that, and how they fundamentally changed their understanding. But unless you develop a concrete programme of immediate, democratic and transitional demands, you are not going to change consciousness of the vast majority of people in this country and around the world. That's why I think the transitional programme is very important. It doesn't mean to say we put out exactly what was written in 1930 or 1940 or 1950 or 1960, because cultures change and ideas change and language changes. But you have to think about how are we going to change the consciousness of people to make them live up to their historical task of overthrowing capitalism. And the other thing is, if you're talking about joining parties, democracy is key. I've been in 2 organisations where democracy was very lacking. And in one organisation, the people around us, we had to put out our own document because they wouldn't publish our document, but they allowed us to publish it and circulate it. When other people, because they said it was too long, where other people had about six different little documents, they weren't prepared to. So democracy is key, because without democracy and people thinking that there's an open debate, you're never going to achieve anything anyway. So I'll leave it there. But the key thing is we've got to think about how we're going to change people's ideas and motivate them to do something different.
Thanks very much, Marion. The last speaker from the floor then, before I bring the 3 comrades back, is Anthony. Oh, sorry, I just muted you again, Anthony. Can you see it? There should be.
I've done it now.
Yes, you have.
When it comes on YouTube, we put it on YouTube. My name's Anthony Brain. I think the first thing I'm going to talk about is what Marion talked about, the necessity of the Revolutionary Party, but how you build the revolutionary cadres are one thing, about the program and around the strategy, basically marches through and all the politics that are necessary. The reason you need a revolutionary party is the masses are incapable of overthrowing capitalism or the working class in and of themselves. But how you, for example, Lenin won the turning in the first was turning the imperialist war into the overthrow of capitalism. But while the demands he won the masses, people had the bread shortage, was peace, bread, and land through the transitional method. The problem is the organizations in Britain and internationally. I don't know about the other countries. I was in a 10-year group in the International Soldiers Group and the 4th International. Then I left because they don't trust him, and there's been no alternative. And all the groups have retreated on it to say nothing to defend against capitalist restoration. That struggle's been on. Yeltsin's been defeated, and Stalin's got stronger and built up the pan economy. China's been salvaged through the political revolutionary upheaval. Then the Russia crushed the political revolutionary upheaval, and then they made it done West, and it would have gone totally. So it's on that. But also, what's actually happened is they become pro-imperialist on Libya, some of the forces, and on Ukraine. And in the last couple of months, we've seen the total capitulation on Trump. I think different groups are going to split. I mean, the SP's gone slightly to the left. You have people acting with vax and being against the unemployed. Then you have there's been a change against racism, that's workers. Then we've had the RCP supporting seeing Trump as some kind of radicalization. whereas for reactionary development, so there's going to be a split in there because they're all going to be really confident. The majority are going to reject this line. I mean, I'll just publish the same how that was a rejection of the politics of the oppressed. But some of the Stalinists who became Chapmanized utilized social democracy, the acquisitions for the working class, but utilized that as a bargaining chip. I've still got that politics going on. The social democracy, the revolutionary tendency went out in the Second International when he was first up. Then he became bureaucratized, reformized. But then there was about the other thing is about how the democracy is key for the Revolutionary Party. The American Socialist Workers' Party's got the internal bulletins from 1930 to 1976 on the Fourth International, because and that's how we could get prepared for the masses. But as Cannon said in his debate with the Weisbord tendency in the Communist League of America, different tends to reflect different class position. There's no class of the class forces
Stop winding
involved.
up now, comrade,
The
please.
last point, the class forces are involved in these disputes, but there's going to be mass campaigns on Gaza, which we can intervene and take the movement forward, get racism and sexism. And there's going to be more conflicts with the planned economies, the colonial revolution, the anti-imperialist wars. So all these debates, we don't different where groups are raging on a principle way, and that's what could happen. But we'll continue the debate. That's why I'm being factual in this meeting to discuss some of the ideas. But there's other people coming into politics, and if we want to educate 100 people, is a good turnout, isn't it?
It certainly is. Thanks, Anthony. Back to our three main speakers. Interesting questions, comments from the floor. I think we're going to go the other way around this time. So we're going to start with Jack, then Kat, and Nick as the last one.
Yeah, thanks. I've enjoyed the discussion. Hope to attend and be invited. I don't know if I'm down for any other openings, but if I am, I'll definitely, even if I'm not, I'll volunteer. Anyway, yeah, just in reply to Anne, I didn't really, I mean, we're all going to express ourselves in different ways. We're all going to come, from our particular angle. I didn't actually notice any differences. I'm sure there will be, but I was sort of left somewhat stunned by what Anne said. So maybe I'm missing something, because when you talk, maybe Kat, you were violently going, what a load of rubbish or something like that. But anyway, I think that we've got quite a lot in common. That's really my feeling. The problem is that we obviously need to then go to comrades where we've got more differences with. And that's going to be more difficult. I'm confident, that when you take first step forward, the second step is easier. The first step is the most difficult thing to do. And I think that's why we've taken it very slow, in terms of planning how to take this move. Just in terms of France, I think we should learn from everywhere. But what I would say myself is that rerunning, the Popular Front, it's called the Popular Front, the new Popular Front, in the 21st century isn't going to end, well, I'm not going to say it will end as in the same tragic way it did in the 30s. But nonetheless, my fear is it's going to end in failure. I mean, to me, the idea of what Britain needs is a Mélenchon. I'm sorry, comrade, we've just had Corbyn, we've had John Landsman. No, what we need is a party, not with some figurehead, right? Not with someone who's putting forward in a situation, okay, they're the biggest party in the Popular Front, and then puts themselves forward. We should be the first to nominate a prime minister. I just think that's absurd. It's exactly what not to do. We don't want to be in a minority government. What a crazy idea. So of course we want to learn, and but we need to learn what's good and what's bad. And I personally think that the new Popular Front in France is something to learn from in terms of its negative lessons as opposed to its positive lessons. In terms of Steve, okay, you're saying there's millions of social democrats out there. What you really mean is Labourites, people who vote Labour. I don't, you know, what do you mean by social democracy? Do you mean, as Nick was sort of outlining it, the sort of post-Russian Revolution understanding of social democracy, the slow road, parliamentary majority, and that will get us to socialism? I don't think that there's millions of people who have that view now, unfortunately. I think Nick's right, that if you look at the Corbyn movement, it didn't even aspire to social democracy. It was just about tinkering with capitalism. It had no vision. And okay, and then you have the slight problem, Steve. It's called the trade union bureaucracy. And if you get, I mean, there's the trade union movement. We should be working in the trade union movement, but are you going to subordinate yourself to the trade union movement, i.e. the trade union bureaucracy? And what happens when they kick you out? Like they kicked us out of the Labour Party with bans, you know, from 1920, and then we've got the latest witch hunt. What do we do about that? We need an independent party. Right, that's the lesson. I'm not saying we shouldn't work in trade unions. I'm not saying we shouldn't work in the Labour Party. Of course we should. I'm not saying we shouldn't work, you know, in the Palestine movement. Of course we should. But we need our own organization, not only with its own program, but with its independent approach to the working class. So the idea of reinventing the Labour Party, I just think is delusional. So, you know, I wish you well, Steve. The 5 points that you outlined, I'm all for them. I'm for more, but that would be a good starting point. I'd be very surprised if the other two comrades rejected any of those points. So, yeah, that's great. Yeah, I would just, on what Andy was saying, you're quite right. Of course, a minimum maximum program doesn't guarantee. We've seen not only Germany and that party collapse, we saw every other party, bar, wasn't it, the Bulgarian Narrows, the Bolsheviks, and what? I think at some Swiss conference, I think Krupskaya said, well, you know, there's the Dutch over there and there's a few Poles, and that's it. So they all collapsed. But what I would say in terms of their collapse, you know, think about that little pamphlet by Lenin, the Renegade Kautsky. They betrayed the program. So I don't think I would myself, I know Rosa Luxemburg came to the conclusion that the minimum program should be discarded. You know, that was the problem. I don't agree with that, but they betrayed the program. That's what I would say. And just in terms of Comrade Marion, look, when you said it must be historic, I mean, I am a Marxist. I know I know the boring old quote from Charlie Marx, and you know, if that's Marxism, I'm not a Marxist and all that. I'm a Marxist. At least I call myself a Marxist. But look, in a mass communist party, I think there should be room for Christians. You clearly aren't historical materialists, as far as I know. There should be room for Muslims, Hindus. I mean, that's not historical materialism. So I wouldn't want in the rules of a communist party saying only people who've mastered historical materialism should be allowed in. Only true atheists should be allowed in. If we accept the program, not agree, accept, that's good enough for me as a starting point. So, you know, what do we expect from young people? What do we expect from new people? Do we expect them to be all sort of fully conversant, or do we end up with a sect? You know, I know that there was a comrade from the SPGB, you know, with an examination before you're allowed to join. Maybe that's an unfair point, Marion. I hope, you know, maybe it is, and I apologize if it was an unfair point. My last point to you is, though, that if you look at the Bolsheviks who didn't betray their program, they had a minimum maximum program. That was successful. That's actually what worked. They didn't have a transitional program. And indeed, if we look at Lenin, at least, and I think he was right, Bukharin advocated a transitional program. But if you look at Lenin in 1919, when they were going to redraft the program, he said, I think we should stick with the minimum maximum because we might be defeated. We might have to go back to operating under the conditions of capitalism. And the problem is with the transitional method is that either it adapts to existing consciousness and says we can't raise workers' militia now, or you can't raise communism now, because that's where the mass of the workers aren't at, and that's clearly true. Either that, or it justifies the split. And I got that from both you and Anthony. I think you're reflecting the problem rather than coming up with the answer. That's my own view. The transitional program's been around a long time. It hasn't worked. And I think that at least I can say, okay, with the example, I know the Bolsheviks, sorry to come back to that, but it worked. Okay, that's me finished, Tina. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll get back to a small point you made, but I think it's quite crucial, and Jaura put it in the chat, is the accept rather than agree with the program. I think that is really, really important, that people can join even if they have differences with it, because they're able to express those differences as well after they've joined. Particular actions, we perhaps want everybody to act together, but before and after an action, comrades should be free to argue against the program if they accept it, and accept it as a basis of action moving together forward. Katrina, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the discussion points. Yeah, I suppose just briefly in response to Anne, I would agree with Jack. I didn't myself see a massive points of difference between what we were arguing. I think in terms of what I was expressing, I guess obviously I was trying to cram a lot in. Some of it might have been a bit rushed, but around the idea, I suppose the argument of like beginning from politics as the basis of how we organise and the basis of how we form our programme. That's in the main address to those within the movement right now who are putting forward arguments about what, obviously there's a lot of talk generally about how we can form a party, how should we form a party, what does that look like? And that's one of the really kind of strong and often compelling arguments that I think does win a lot of people over, that what, we're here with our programs in our little groups and we're shut away from the rest of the movement. We need to put that to one side and we need to go out there and say, what do you guys think? And then that should be the basis of forming a party. So that's the kind of argument of assemble, and I suppose what came across in the article by Joe Todd. And I think that is an argument that is appealing to a lot of people. And I guess what I would see us all kind of broadly agreeing on is that isn't the basis from which we form a party. I definitely agree with what Jack said, and I think that's kind of important to lay emphasis on. It doesn't mean that isn't a dynamic process. It doesn't mean that we're coming along with all of the answers all written and pre-prepared and saying you receive it from us. Obviously, it's as Jack outlined, it's a dynamic process where we continuously learn in unexpected ways about how the struggle is going to develop, about even the forms of organisation that it's going to throw up. But it's beginning with the idea that we're organising on the basis of a strategy for social transformation, and that is expressed through a programme, and that is the basis upon which we organise and upon which that determines the needs of our organisation. So I guess see that obviously I don't want to speak for people, but I think that there is probably broad agreement on that, where there might be more disagreements, might be around our practical approach in the here and now. So obviously in terms of how we relate to and how we advance these discussions with others, there might be some kind of disagreements around that. I expect there'll be some disagreements around that, in fact. But I don't think that they're insurmountable. That's about the practical work that we're doing in the here and now. And I think Lee's point in the chat, I actually thought it was important and useful. We're not talking here with this fusion process about laying the basis of a mass communist party, or that it's going to start escalating really quickly and we're going to have it before you know it. We're talking about hopefully forming a serious and kind of, meaningful coherence of those who are making arguments and trying to advance this project of partyism, trying to, through this process, show in practice that this is something that, to kind of put the politics that we're arguing for into practice, to learn ourselves from this process. We can kind of write about that and put it out more widely, win other people over in practice. We can write as many articles as we like about why it's meaningful to have Marxist regroupment, why Marxist unity is a good thing, but showing it in practice and being able to demonstrate that in practice, that is something that is, incredibly, from my perspective, that's incredibly meaningful in being able to win people over to the type of arguments that we're making. What results from this process would be a small force, absolutely, no doubt about it. But it would be a cohesion that would be more than the sum of its parts from my perspective. It would give us something that would be rejuvenated through critical exchanges with each other, that would have a kind of renewed energy, a renewed perspective on how to take this work forward. And it would give us a strong force, even though it would be small. I absolutely think that we could punch above our weight in pushing these arguments forward within the movement as a whole. But yeah, I don't think it would be wise for anybody to missell what is on the cards here. But that doesn't make it less meaningful to me in terms of pushing forward from the situation that we're in right now on the left. But yeah, obviously it is absolutely important to lay out what would the work of that organisation be, what activities would it be engaged in, and to be clear on that. And obviously that's something that hopefully can be developed and laid out. Just quickly on the point about the programme, I would absolutely agree that the basis from which we form the organisation is the acceptance of programme, not the agreement with every dot and comma within that. I think that's basically essential to have any meaningful organisation where we can have differences, and we can, if I have differences with aspects of the programme, I can fight openly for those, and I can try to win other people to that. Just finally in terms of the transitional programme, I guess it depends on the expression of the transitional programme from my perspective. I think some people express forms of the transitional programme that don't sound a million miles away from the minimum maximum programme, the function of transitional demands. It's not to simply kind of like push and cajole people along into struggle. It's there to draw a bridge to the overarching strategy and goal of social transformation. I suppose my biggest problem with the transitional programme is the way it's applied in practice by the Trotskyist movement, which appears much more in practice like moving away from the idea of having an open, conscious, clear strategy of social transformation, and it looks more like using demands to simply get the class moving, and then once the class gets moving, then a small group can kind of jump to the head of that. And I think that, when you look at, for example, I'll close it there. Thanks very much.
So sorry, you didn't have to stop right away, but thank you. I should also say, before I bring Nick in, I mean, it is encouraging comrades coming together, especially if they come from quite different political backgrounds. And Nick comes from quite a very different political background. He used to be the national organizer, as I understand it, of the Socialist Party for many, many years, so a Trotskyist organization, and comes from quite a different background from Jack. So, just in terms of us dealing with differences and moving together forward, I think is a very positive sign. Over to you, Nick.
Okay, thanks, Tina. just to correct what I was. So I was a member of Militant, and I was the editor of the paper. So I worked full time for the Militant for, I think, 14 or 16 years, I can't remember. And for some of that time, I was finance organizer. I was the national treasurer. I became the editor. I was on the central committee, and I was on the executive committee. So a lot of experience in the Trotskyist movement is where I got my formation, as they call it in Spanish. But I've not been involved formally since 1996. So that's another 30 years of experience in and around the Marxist left. I consider that I've been a Marxist and a communist, as I said earlier, from my teens. But my ideas have changed a little. So there's so many points that have been raised both in the chat and in the discussion that it's impossible to deal with them all. I also am going to start with Anne's point. It may be that Anne's sort of got a, antennae that picks up things that the rest of us can't pick up, because I haven't heard anything from Kat or Jack that I actually disagree with. So that's the starting point. But the other point is that when we do grow up in these silos, and sometimes that's a complete matter of chance. We may start out, we're young, we're enthusiastic, we come across an organization, and that's where we end up. But we then end up, the word silo has been used, and we use words differently, we use terminology differently, we don't necessarily understand what somebody else from a different silo is saying. They may use the same word and mean something different. They may use a different word and mean the same thing. So part of the problem is overcoming that. And part of this process, I see, is actually people from different backgrounds, and I'm from a different background, and others like me, understanding what everybody means. I'm going to repeat something that I said earlier, and it was something raised in the chat repeatedly. I do not think that the majority of reasons that are put forward for the different organizations are at all valid or justified. They are largely to do with ego. We've got one organization that exists solely because of loyalty to an individual, no programmatic differences with the organization from which that person split. We've got different organizations saying exactly the same thing. And you wonder, what on earth is it apart from ego, or whether it's of an individual or a collective? What's the point? Some people actually, to comment on something Steve said, some people prefer to be in an organization of 10 than contemplate the idea of being in an organization of 10 million. Oh my goodness. Some people would just prefer to be in a party with themselves than actually form a party. And this is the thing, we actually need to get over that. So I'm going to just deal with some of the particular points that have been raised, and it's probably because people don't know, they know about my background but don't know what I'm saying now. First of all, I have problem with the transitional program. My first problem is that most Trotskyists don't apply the transitional program in the way that Trotsky meant it to be interpreted. They actually miss out the first paragraph, which is talking about the need for revolution. The second is that it's trying to gauge the consciousness and go in at the level of the consciousness of the workers that you're talking to. I have a fundamental problem with that approach, if that is what is intended, because how do communist ideas ever get voiced unless we voice them? And I think we should just be bold about things. So I would like to, my position is we present a program for government. So that may be the minimum maximum program. But the danger is we lower the main part of the program, which is the maximum program, which was the criticism that Trotsky made. That needs to be there. But we also need to say, what would we do if the working class came to power? So that's the way that I'm approaching it. And I'm going to listen interestingly and participate in the discussions, because my starting point for a communist party, even or the nucleus of a communist party, is that there's got to be a program that we can present and argue for and explain why it's necessary. And my position, and I think Andy asked the question, my position is that people should join or be able to join on the basis that they accept the program, not necessarily that they agree with every dot and comma. I would have difficulties if I was expected to agree with every dot and comma, anticipating what may come out of the fusion process. I don't know. We'll see how the discussions go. But the fact that I would have the right to continue to argue for a change, and of course the program itself is a living thing, because as Jack said, we learn from the struggle. And it may be that learning from the struggle means that we have to revise something. But what we should not do is hide our ideas. That's the most important thing. It seems to me that even revolutionary organizations, or organizations that claim to be revolutionary, have a sort of political schizophrenia. They're very, very revolutionary inside their own internal organization, or when they're speaking to another communist, Marxist, socialist. But quite often in the movement, they don't act like communists, or don't speak like communists, perhaps because they're worried about not being heard or not getting an ear, or because they're going to get rebuffed. Well, we just have to get used to getting rebuffed. But I do agree with something that Jack said earlier, and which was the point I was trying to make, is that most workers, if we put our arguments clearly, will agree with us. The question is, well, is it possible? That's perhaps the next difficult discussion. It is possible. First of all, it's necessary. And even if it was difficult, we can't shy away from it. In a sense, we're cursed, aren't we? As communists, we're cursed, because we know that communism is necessary. So we have to do something about it. And sometimes it's hard. So, we just can't get away from that. We just got to do what we can. So we need to explain. And then the other question that was raised, I mean, sometimes, people, me, I can sort of say a throwaway comment and somebody will pick up it and there's a possible heresy here. We shouldn't look at the past. I wasn't saying that at all. I mean, if you look behind me, I've got Marx and Engels, the collected works of Lenin, and all sorts of history books. And in however many decades I've been a communist, I've read a lot. And I think that the experience of the working class, the theoretical development of the workers' movement, is extremely important. What I think that we need to do, though, in approaching or applying it, is we say, well, what were the circumstances at the time when something was said or done? Was it correct when it was said? And do the circumstances, what are they now? Can we take something from that? So I think what Lenin, Marx, Engels, Trotsky said on a whole number of occasions are valid, and we could stretch that out to other people. So the question is trying to learn from the method and apply the method. I believe that a communist organization that presents a program for abolishing this system and therefore getting rid of the circumstances in which most people on the planet, what's the 8.8 billion people, is it now? Most people on the planet do not experience a good life because of the problems of capitalism. And the danger is that they go and find ideas elsewhere because they're not getting ours. If they got ours, we'd make headway. The last thing on Lee's point, nobody in this discussion, as far as I've heard, has said this is going to be an easy thing, or it's going to happen overnight, or a mass party is going to be sucked out of our collective thumb. Not at all. We've all said we're not getting carried away. Let's not exaggerate. This is small potatoes, but small potatoes can become a sack. It's perhaps not a good metaphor, but there we go. The thing is, we have to build, we have to accrue, and sometimes it'll be ones and twos, and sometimes we may get splits, and so on. But we've got no alternative. Steve says you won't build one in 25, 26. Well, okay. What about 27, 28, 29? What about 36, 37 if we're still going? He says, oh, well, there'll be a social democratic party of tens of thousands. I've got no doubt about it. So what? Is that the answer? Should we put our efforts into building it? No, I mean, this is the start of the process. I would encourage people to follow it, see whether you can get involved, listen, raise your criticisms. Now, the last point that I want to make is to those that would want to, some of those who we would want to be involved, who may have concerns about how it might develop, get involved and find out. And if you've got criticisms or concerns, raise them. Because if you don't raise them, then they can't be answered. Anyway, look, I'm quite optimistic and I'm quite enthusiastic about the process. And so I'm looking forward to see how it develops. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Really good discussion. That was only the first session. We're going to have about 20, 25 sessions already planned, which will be on our website very soon. Next week, Moshe Machova, who's not just speaking about Palestine, he's also he's a communist. He's interested in building a communist party. So next week he'll be speaking about what kind of party, why, and we touched on this today, why we need a non-ideological party and a democratic party. This is the subject of accept rather than agree. Hopefully Nick will be able to speak as well. If not, we'll have another second speaker. And then the week after, we're going to have Kat Rylance and Marcus Strom speaking about sort of broad left fronts and why we think they cannot possibly succeed and why we need to build something else. Thank you very much for a very interesting first discussion. Over 100 people in the session. Well worth doing. Thank you very much, comrades. And I'll see you next